Hi, I'm Femi OK. Welcome to the stream. Today we're talking about slavery reparations, former colonizers, and what potentially the payment of reparations could do in terms of institutional racism and racism around the world. Have a look here at my laptop. Just a reminder about the transatlantic slave trade. This is a timeline from the transatlantic slave trade database. Those slave ships that you see crossing from the African continent and back through to the Caribbean and North America. They are Portuguese and British and French and Spanish from the Netherlands, from America. Gives you an idea of the height of the transatlantic slave trade and what it meant. An estimate of between 12.5 million people and maybe up to 20 million people from the African continent were enslaved. So two questions that always come up when slavery reparations are talked about. One, nothing to do with me, nothing to do with my government. I wasn't around at the time. I'm not responsible. And two, it was a long time ago. What other questions would you like to put to our guests? The comment section is right here on YouTube. You can be part of today's discussion.
Whenever politicians discuss the impact of MacArthur, that is slavery and colonisation, there's a habit for them to discuss it in terms of the past, as if it was a one-time event that occurred centuries ago, and if justice is just a compensation check. But MacArthur is the reason why African people around the world live without the protection of human rights. So reparations for MacArthur must be holistic, and they must address Afrophobia. That is the global dehumanization of African people and people of African heritage all over the world. Reparations for MacArthur must be centered around justice, and they must create committed agents for change who will dismantle the systemic and institutional policies that are a legacy of what was the most monstrous crime against humanity.
Joining us to talk about slavery reparations, we have VERENE, ESTHER, NKECHI. Ladies, it's so good to have you with us. VERENE, welcome to the stream. Introduce yourself to our global audience.
Thank you very much. My name is VERENE Shepherd. I am a social historian and the director of the Center for Reparation Research at the University of the West Indies here in the Caribbean, and I'm one of the vice chairs of the United Nations Committee on the Elimination of Racial Discrimination.
Good to have you. Hello, Esther. Introduce yourself to our stream viewers.
Hi, greetings. My name is Esther STANFORD-XOSEI, and I am a juris consult, which is a specialist in jurisprudence, the science and philosophy of law. I'm also the coordinator general of the Stop the Maangamizi We Charge Genocide Ecocide campaign. And Maangamizi is a Kiswahili word for African Holocaust.
Esther, so good to have you. We'll talk to you more in just a moment, but first I have to greet NKECHI. NKECHI, welcome to the stream. Introduce yourself to our global audience.
Greetings, Femi. My name is NKECHI TAIFA. I'm an attorney, I'm an activist, I'm an advocate, and I am an author. I'm a founding member of NCOBRA, the National Coalition of Blacks for Reparations in America, and I'm an inaugural commissioner on the National African American Reparations Commission.
So let's start with the United Nations. This is the Human Rights Chief, Michelle Bachelet, on July the 12th, making a deep connection between enslaved people and reparations and what reparations actually means.
There is an urgent need to confront the legacies of enslavement, the transatlantic slave trade, colonialism and successive racially discriminatory policies and systems, and to seek reparatory justice. Despite some initiatives towards truth-seeking and limited forms of reparation, including memorialization, acknowledgements, apologies, and litigation, our research could not find a single example of a state that has comprehensively reckoned with the past or accounted for its impacts on the lives of people of African descent today.
Yes, I just played a timeline. It wasn't even the entire timeline of the transatlantic slave trade, but from, let's say, 1500, so the 16th century, right up until the 19th century, people were trafficked, Africans were trafficked. And then there's this sense of nervousness about putting a price on that. How do you do that? Because that's what reparations is doing, isn't it? NKECHI, you start.
Plus, it's much more than that as well. It's not just compensation for the enslavement era, for the MacArthur of the Holocaust of the transatlantic slave trade, but at least with respect to in the United States, for everything that's happened since then, the enslavement era, the black codes, the peonage system, the chain gangs, the sharecropping, the Homestead Act, not being able to get the benefits of that, or the GI Bill, the redlining, the Jim Crow apartheid, the mass incarceration, all of these things combined, the black-white economic wealth gap, the health disparities, the educational inequities, the criminal punishment system. So it is compensation for all of that combined. And I will say this, no amount of financial compensation can at all compensate for everything that African people worldwide throughout the diaspora has gone through. So it will be the situation of a negotiated settlement. That's what we're talking about. We're not talking about compensation that is going to fully, completely, and totally atone for everything that has happened, but it will be a step towards that necessary healing that we need.
Esther, continue.
Yeah, for me, I take the position from international human rights law and international humanitarian law that make it very clear that a comprehensive reparations strategy or program or settlement has to include multifaceted remedies, including remedies of restitution. Of course, compensation has been mentioned, rehabilitation, measures of satisfaction, what's called symbolic reparations. And for me, most importantly, which is actually underemphasized in the discourse on African reparations, is guarantees of non-repetition. How do we ensure that what has happened to us and continues to happen does not ever happen again?
You know, Esther, people will be doing a double take, but like, of course, enslaved people, that couldn't happen again. What would the guarantee be that you would need?
Well, it's not just about enslavement. Actually, the crimes of the Ma'angamizi continue to this day. We're talking about racism as a direct legacy, anti-Black racism and its specific form, known as Afrophobia, which Toyin spoke to. And actually, we're talking about colonization, neo-colonialism. So there's a whole range of violations and dispossessions and displacements of African people around the world which require repair. So restitution could mean any number of things, including the right to restoration of our own group rights, our own individual human rights, the right to a nationality, the right to a homeland, as opposed to being referred to as an ethnic minority.
I'm just looking here at my laptop here, Verene, a headline that caught the world's attention. Jamaica plans to seek reparations from Britain over slavery. And then Ron says underneath that story, posting this for us, go get it. It won't change the past, but it could positively affect the future. Ron gets it. Verene.
Ron gets it, and many people get it. Our panelists get it, and I'm sure lots of your listeners and your viewers get it. But can I just say that this is not new. Jamaica has been on this path to seek reparatory justice for a long time. I think now that we are a part of a global movement, it is appearing as if this is something new. But remember, when we talk about reparation and the fight for freedom and liberation and rights, we have to talk about from the very moment of conquest, colonization, enslavement, the trafficking in our ancestors, the post-colonial harm, the cashless emancipation. All of these things have this movement has a long genealogy. And so it's a continuous movement towards a settlement, which has not yet happened. So Jamaica, in fact, in 2009, formed the National Commission on Reparation. It's called the Council now. And CARICOM, there's a regional commission. And also, Jamaica is part of that. And Rastafari have been carrying on this fight for a very long time in Jamaica, outside of Jamaica. So I just want to say it's not new. even though there's an intensification of the movement, because the more people say, no, we're not going to talk to you, the more we're insisting, yes, you must talk to us, and you must do what my colleagues have said you're to do. Apologize, which has 3 dimensions. You accept responsibility, you commit to non-repetition, and you commit to repair. And we're waiting on all of those.
And actually, I want to just hop in for a moment if I can, because I want to agree 100% with my sister, VERENE. Reparations is not new. In the United States, the concept did not drop from the sky with Ta-Nehisi Coates' article in the Atlantic magazine, The Case for Reparations, or even recently with Nicole Hannah-Jones and her 1619 project that talked about reparations in the New York Times. Reparations is a long-standing issue of international law, which the United States has actually participated in from the time of the end of the enslavement period. Reparations were in fact paid in the United States. They just weren't paid to Black folk. They were paid to the former slave owners for the loss of the so-called,
yes,
property.
I want to jump in on that because you're absolutely right. So that's what I'm saying. It's been going on for a very long time. We're just naming it different things now. But it's okay if people come to the movement at different times. It's okay. We welcome everybody. It's a big tent. All are welcome, and all has all people have a place. But yes, those who were paid were not our people, and therefore we are pressing for compensation, but as a part of a development plan in the case of the Caribbean.
So I guess I have a question to ask, and I'm going to ask this question via Pamela Denise Long. My question is that often in this reparations debate that has been going on for a very, very long time, as you point out, VERENE, that it seems easier for people of colour, for Black people, to see why reparations are necessary. Not just money, but an entire plan, okay, of reparations. And it seems very difficult for people who aren't Black to see this. And I'm curious as to why. Here is Pamela's, she just does a whole list of why it's important, why reparations are important. Have a listen, have a look.
The United States must pay reparations for chattel slavery to Black American descendants of U.S. slaves due to outright neglect and harmful policies like redlining and mass incarceration, including Biden's law. Black Americans have 1/10 the wealth of white Americans. As a descendant of slavery and parent to an 8th-generation Black American, a just reparations plan for us includes cash payments for 400+ years of stolen labor and racial trauma experienced by me, my child, and our ancestors.
So, Esther, as I predicted, I'm getting the questions that I mentioned that I was expecting at the top of the show. Ethos, we are talking many years ago, though. Peggy, we should not have to pay for something we had nothing to do with. Why is it difficult for people who aren't Black to see that reparations has a place in 2021? Esther?
I think some people who are not of African ancestry have a problem with it. There are many so-called white people and other, Asian people and others who do get reparations, certainly in the work that I'm doing in Europe. One of the difficulties is, it's already been mentioned, this dehumanization of people of African ancestry continues. It has been made systemic, so in terms of legal systems, the education system, which often miseducates and doesn't teach the truth about our history, even prior to enslavement, because our history didn't begin with enslavement. And there is a lack of recognition of how the world that has been created today, including all its inequality, is as a result of this history that we are all speaking about. And in the UK, it's actually not history, because it was only in 2015 that the loan that was taken out by the British government to pay enslavers in 1835 was finally repaid. So that means every generation, including of people of African diaspora, including African Caribbean heritage, has also had to pay back by way of, extortion of taxes. So this is a modern day thing, and it is unjust. And I don't see why it's so difficult to recognize the inequality, the injustice that is meted out to African people, but yet we are expected to recognize the Jewish Holocaust, the dispossession and lack of sovereignty of indigenous peoples, which we do. But then we are also human beings too, and we must assert our right to be recognized as such, and also our right to a remedy and to repair. And that repair must be full and holistic.
So let's talk about reparations. How do they work? There have been some examples. Institutions, organizations are doing their own reparations. They're saying, yes, we were complicit. We understood that we benefited from the slave trade for chattel slavery, and this is what we're doing in order to repair that damage. NKECHI, give us some examples from the United States. Do you have any?
So let me just say this first. The harms from the enslavement era and beyond were multifaceted. Thus, the remedies must be multifaceted as well. Just recently, there is a jurisdiction in the United States called Evanston, Illinois. They used a very creative way of atoning for the past. They used tax revenue from their legal cannabis industry to fund reparations projects in that city. Issues that stem from the enslavement era, specifically with respect to housing discrimination and what we call redlining. That was very creative, shall I say. There's Georgetown University. The reason why Georgetown University stands today is because of the sale by the Jesuits who owned Georgetown University of over 272 Black men, women, and children, and babies. Okay, to keep Georgetown from going into bankruptcy. They've just called for I'm not even sure if it was million or billion, but of monies to set aside to begin to atone for that act. But basically, it is the federal government, with the bill that is on the table today, H.R. 40, the Commission to Study and Develop Reparation Proposals for African Americans Act, which is the piece of the resistance, shall we say. It is the end to everything. You have the federal government, you have the state government, local governments, academic and religious institutions and industries and corporations and private estates, but the role that the federal government played and their the situation that they must remedy, they must apologize, they must compensate, they must allow for that satisfaction. That is what must be paramount at this time.
Verene, let me share this with you. This is from the Kingdom of Kush. We told the Kingdom of Kush we were doing this programme, so have a look here. Reparations should be paid. The Vatican and the Church of England owe an apology to the return of stolen artefacts as well from the country of origin. The indigenous Native American tribes are owed an apology and reparation. So many apologies out there that should be made. Yes. What importance is an apology? Is that the starting point? Well, do you have to get a sorry first?
It would be nice to get a sorry first. And that's how I started, by talking about the different dimensions of an apology. But we can't get stuck. If the apology doesn't come, we wait on it and we don't do anything else. But I want to just reinforce the point that my colleagues, my sisters have made, that this is not too long in the past at all. If something was done in the past, it was settled and so on, then you could even begin to think like that. But this is a continuing harm. We are talking about stolen artifacts, looted artifacts which have not been returned. I know some people are talking about returning that now, some universities and museums. We're talking about psychological damage. We're talking about the health crisis. We're into the pandemic now, and we are seeing the effects of the lack of social infrastructure in places whose wealth was extracted to ensure that places like Britain became rich. We are talking about the legacies with which we are living, and we are saying that the debt has not been paid, the accounts have not been settled, and therefore we have to carry on.
All right, Verene, so I'm not debating with you, but what I am wondering about is you cannot have this dialogue alone. It can't be you, NKECHI, Esther, the community of people who believe in reparations. What about the former colonizers? The Caribbean states have written to European former colonizers. Sometimes they reply to you, sometimes they don't. They do not want to have anything to do with reparations. How do you move forward? What do you do?
That's why we have to do what we're all doing in the movement globally. We are saying we are going to keep up the work, public education, because one way to get people to move is to ensure your populations are with you. And therefore, public education is quite important. And we are also saying, if everyone who has been colonized, if you're living in a colonized state, you must look around you and see the impact of what Europeans did. Therefore, you do have doubters within our space as well. But we are trying to mobilize so many people, indigenous people.
There are some Caribbean politicians who do not believe that reparations will ever be paid. They just don't believe it.
Well,
I think they are working towards it, though. You do have a CARICOM reparation commission. You have a prime ministerial subcommittee, and everyone is working. You have individual politicians who are themselves making some inroads. For example, Antigua-Barbuda, Prime Minister Brown is making inroads in terms of Harvard and Oxford. So there are multiple tracks, is what I'm saying. Haiti is asking for restitution. This is what France did to stymie the development of this country that has been such a beacon in terms of revolution and the struggle for rights. So we can't drop, even if we get weary. I always say, emancipation, quote unquote, you know, the end of African enslavement, the Manganese, it took centuries. Our ancestors didn't even know when they were fighting and getting hanged and burned and everything that it would end. They kept on. Our generation has a responsibility to take the torch and carry on, even if it looks difficult.
I'm just going to put this very
agitate.
NKECHI, let me just put this to you. This is from Scott Carney, just so you can debate, because you can't debate amongst yourself because you all agree. Scott Carney says, I don't think they'll pay the former colonizers. Financial compensation for historical abuses seems unlikely. NKECHI, go ahead, pick up.
Yeah, no, I just want to say we need to agitate, educate, and organize. The global movement, we're in a global movement right now. It is because of CARICOM. Because of what CARICOM did, it inspired us in the United States. When our reparations movement was at a low, it inspired us in 2015 to form the National African American Reparations Commission, modeled off of the CARICOM model. And it really created an upsurge. What happened just recently with Michelle Bachelet and the UN High Commissioner and the like, what it did was it caused the U.S. Secretary of State, Anthony Blinken, to issue an invitation, a formal invitation for the UN Special Rapporteur on contemporary forms of racial U.S. racism to come to the United States. So what happens in one area has an impact on what's happening in other areas as well. So it's part of this global movement. Unfortunately, we are near the end, believe it or not, of the decade of U.S. decade of people of African descent.
That went so fast. I remember the beginning of that decade. Where did that decade go?
We're halfway.
Yikes.
Not finished yet.
Yikes. All right, guys, let me just play in one more comment. This is from Professor Darity. He makes a very convincing argument for reparations. He also mentions something called redlining, which our audiences outside of the US, all you need to know is it's about housing discrimination applied often to people of colour. Here is his, as far as I'm concerned, very convincing argument. Have a listen, have a look.
The case for reparations for Black American descendants of U.S. slavery extends well beyond the atrocity of enslavement. In particular, one has to take into account the nearly century-long period of legal segregation in the United States, coupled with upwards of 100 massacres that took place from the end of the Civil War into the 1940s, that resulted in massive loss of Black lives, but also the seizure and appropriation of Black property by the white terrorists. And then in the post-civil rights period, we still have ongoing atrocities, including mass incarceration, police executions of unarmed Blacks, and sustained discrimination in housing, credit, and employment markets.
I am going to say, NKECHI, VERENE, and Esther, you are fired up. Thank you so much for being on the stream today. I will see you next time. Take care, everybody.